All right, we'll get started here in just a couple minutes. My name is Greg Ondo. I'm presenting from Northern Virginia in the United States, and we're going to go ahead and get started here in just a couple minutes. We're going to let some people get logged in. Go ahead and shut off some of the audio going to my monitoring PC so we don't have feedback, but it seems like we're getting some audio. If you want to, in the comments field, if you have questions, we had people that had sent some questions in. So we'll go through that as well as questions that are entered in the comments field. I see there's maybe a little bit of confusion with the start time, so I apologize for that. So I may have created it in a different time zone, and that may have caused some problems. So I apologize for the confusion, but we'll go ahead and get started. All right. So again, feel free to introduce yourself. Tell us where you're from in the comments field, and we'll go ahead and get started here in a couple minutes as people are getting logged in. All right. All right. So good to see some familiar faces here. All right, so if you guys want to, we'll just get everyone logged in. All right, so we have from UK, from South Africa, Texas, Pine Grove, Pennsylvania. Good to see you, Taylor. Norway, Dominican Republic. That's great. I think it's the first time we've had someone live from Dominican Republic. Someone from chilly Las Vegas. I guess it's not usually that cold here at this time of year. Nottingham in the UK. Okay, seeing a question about tempo track. I'll go ahead and copy that over. All right, we have Holland, Manchester, Norway, North Carolina, Lebanon, London, Sweden, Hampshire, UK. I probably pronounced that incorrectly. We have Istanbul in Turkey, Manchester, Northern California, Amsterdam, Charlotte, Germany. Just copying over a couple questions. Thanks everyone for great questions. Looking forward to the hangout here. All right, we have Diego from South Florida. I guess we met at NAMM. Good to see you on the hangout, New Jersey. All right, we have Austria, Brazil, Mars. I think it's the second time you've had someone from Mars. It's good. I guess the rover is working well. Kuwait, Germany, Florida Keys. One of my favorite areas. Just out of curiosity, what key you're in. I vacationed there a lot. We have Iraq, Louisville, Montrose, Pennsylvania. Okay, see Taylor's question about templates. We'll get to that. All right, Panama. Mission Viejo. All right, so we have a question on tagging. All right, so again, we'll get started here soon. All right, Portugal, Indonesia. All right, Colorado Springs. We have Hampshire, Old England. Old Hampshire, Old England. All right, copying over some questions. Thanks everyone for great questions. All right, we have India, La La Land. All right, so a question on the overview. We'll see if we can get to that. All right, South Korea, Winter Park, Florida. Good to see you, Rhett. Okay, we have a question on the Variaudio. We'll go over that for the MIDI reference tracks. Okay, so we have Tavernier Key just north of Esmeralda. It's beautiful. I was just down at Hawks Cay Resort on vacation with my family a couple years ago. Had a great time. So we have a question. I have 8.5. Could you say when things still apply to that version? I'll try, but sometimes it's hard to do that with as many topics as we cover, but I'll try. All right, so we have someone from the north of Germany, Jens. All right, so Ireland. All right, we'll just be collecting some more questions here, just a couple more minutes, and we'll get started. All right, so we have a Scotsman that lives in Ireland, UAE. You have some good friends there. You have Italy. Okay, just copying over some more questions. Thanks everyone for wonderful questions. All right, we have Canada. Bangladesh. Yeah, we are, and the Bangladesh question was about ambisonics, so we do have a tutorial that's being, I'm working on doing ambisonic stuff, so look for that soon. All right, just copying over some more questions. So, a quick question from Taylor: when Steinberg stopped using Groove Agent 1, did they transfer all of the presets from Groove Agent 1 to the current version of Groove Agent? Yes, they did. So, all the content is there as well. All right, we also have, excuse me, Northern Ireland in Belfast. So we have a question: someone's rural broadband isn't keeping up. Will the video be left up? Yes, it will be available to watch afterwards. Okay, we have a question on sample libraries, managing those. So a question: how do I like the new update to Cubase? Yeah, I think 10 is really pretty wonderful. A lot of great new features, especially new Variaudio stuff and mixed console snapshots. So those are quite nice. All right, Ireland, Oslo, Norway. We have someone says they're loving Cubase 10. Los Angeles, Israel. All right, we have DC in the house. That's great. Question: do I plan to come to the UK sometime? I would love to go to the UK and do some demos. We have staff there, but occasionally, I was there a couple years ago for when we launched Dorco to get kind of trained up on that. All right, Alberta, Bangladesh. All right. So we actually have a suggestion on freeze all instruments. You could check out some of the render in place options. We'll show that as well. So let's go ahead and get started. We have a lot of questions to go through, and we'll have a lot to cover today. All right. So one of the things that we discussed last time was someone asked me how to create a cut head or cut tail macro. And what this could allow you to do is to it's a kind of a typical editing, a lot of times used in post-production, where you could move the particular cursor to a point and say, I wanted to cut the tail. So basically cut everything from that cursor point on, or cut the head, which would be just to cut everything from that cursor before. So we could do this. This is kind of a native function in Ondo because it's often used in post-production. So I made a macro, so I played around with it a little bit, and let's take a look at the macros here. And we'll just leave this up so we could take a look. So I made a couple of macros for cut tail and cut head. So basically they're very similar. So we could see starting here, we have cut head. So we'll go to edit, split at cursor. Then what we want to do is I just move the transport nudge -1 frame. So that knocks the playhead cursor back. And then select events under cursor and then delete. For the cut tail, we kind of do almost the same exact thing, but we move, we nudge it 1 frame forward in time. So I'll leave this up here real quick. So if people want to, you could pause the video here, but it's edit, split at cursor, transport, nudge minus 1 frame or nudge plus 1 frame. Edit select events under the cursor, and then edit delete. So how this would work when we're actually doing it, if I move my playhead cursor to here, I could select the event. At this point, we'll go to and trigger the macros, and you get to assign your own keyboard shortcuts to the macros, but I'll say cut head, and you can see that's just going to basically delete everything directly from that point on. And conversely, if I say cut tail, which would leave the beginning part of where the cursor is, we can now just kind of delete everything directly after that, and that's what the cut tail is here. So again, if you wanted to make those macros, go to kind of your key commands and show the macros, and we'll just expose them so you can see it one more time to be able to do the cut head and cut tail macros. So that's one of the questions we had from the last Hangout that I just wanted to kind of play around with and get back to the person that asked that in the previous Hangout. Okay, so we had a question on, was wondering if you could go over the definition tab of the sample editor in the next Club Cubase and what you might use it for. I never use it, maybe because I don't understand it. All right, so when we double click, we could launch the sample editor in the lower zone here. And it's hop one. This would allow you to do Variaudio, you could do audio warp, but also kind of the definition. And this has some handy functionality. So one of the things is you could place a track into musical mode. So if something isn't quite lining up to the grid, say with the metronome, you could double click here and just say, okay, let's just have that kind of line up and automatically adjust. And you could place it into musical mode if you wanted to. Now, some other things that you could do that may not be so apparent, and you could also place tracks into musical mode directly here. Now, as you're doing some different edits, you may notice that some parts may not fall exactly on the beat. And this is what we could do when we say, okay, let's set our grid, and we could set this to quarter notes, eighth notes, or 16th notes. So now as I look at this, we can see this will be our eighth notes, and we kind of see the grid as we move along. But let's say I want to kind of manually adjust, and let's say something was a little bit late in time. At this point, we could just kind of listen to particular, let's listen to. So if I wanted to move an event so that it was perfectly on time, what I could do now is just kind of move this number 2. I could move that section right there to 2, and that would automatically just kind of shift the particular notes. So this way I could say this is the grid, and I want that to be on the grid. And what this will do is it'll take this information here and match that to the grid. So you can see if I come here and I want this on the downbeat, I could come here, drag the line over. And at that point, that portion of the audio will automatically snap to the grid marker that I have. So if I say, I want this to be exactly on the eighth note, move the eighth note line over to that, and then that just simply will adjust to automatically follow and be kind of on the grid. So, and you could set this grid to be 16th notes. So as you kind of move, you could have 4 divisions per beat, or if it's set to eighth notes, we could come directly here and you have 2 divisions per beat, or if it's to quarter, at this point, it's only 1 single division per beat. So you could place things and have it kind of snap. So if you have a performance, or maybe the timing was a little bit off, you could just say, okay, I need this eighth note here, and I need that drum to snap directly to that. We'll see kind of the timeline go back and move the audio vent and stretch it to automatically fit. So those are some handy things to do within the definition tab. All right, so we had questions on like what's called a shared copy. So let's say if I added a instrument track here, and I had, let's say, a beautiful 21st century composition piece here. Let me just, so let's say if I look at this particular part, I will kind of link these two here. So let's say as we zoom in, I just wanted to take my paintbrush tool here, and let's say I have that particular event, and let's say I had copied this event. Now the question gets to be if I change the particular note within this event, that we may want that to automatically change in the subsequent events that were copied from that. So if we want to do that, we could do what's called a shared copy. I think it's just going to be Option plus maybe, let me see if I can remember the keyboard shortcut, and we'll just say plus Shift. And now as I adjust a particular note, so if you hold down Alt or Option plus Shift, now anytime that I would make a change here in this particular note or this particular event, so I'll move these notes down in pitch, we'll see that these parts will automatically reflect those changes. So any change I make here will automatically be kind of copied and reflected in these changes as well. So that's how you could do a shared copy of that event. All right, so we'll move on to some other questions. So question I saw on the forum was about MIDI files automatically getting routed to Halion Sonic SE by default, and how to change that if someone wanted to use a different sound source or kind of spread it across. And this could be found just under the preferences. So if we go to your preferences on the Mac, it's under the Cubase menu. Under the Windows, it's going to be in the edit menu, I believe. So we can go to your preferences. We could go to MIDI to MIDI files. And here we'll see on importing MIDI files, destination. So you could say the default will be set to Halion Sonic SE multi-timbral. You could have it go directly to instrument tracks or directly to MIDI tracks. So if you wanted to route it to particular instrument tracks or MIDI tracks to assign different sounds, this is kind of the preference that you want to change. Again, the default mode would use kind of a general MIDI or XG bank within Halion Sonic SE, so that you import a MIDI file and you could immediately hear it and the program changes would all carry over. But if you want to be more creative, just simply come over here and set it to MIDI tracks or to instrument tracks, and then you should be all set, and the MIDI files will import exactly as expected. We had a question about someone who was doing automation in their, so let's say if we're doing automation on a particular track, we'll open up, and what they ran into is we'll say we have volume automation, and I'll just write some fader moves. And they had the automation kind of showing up in a bit of a different mode than they were used to. So what they had was this option called use virgin territory was enabled. So as we would kind of play back and automate particular tracks, we would only see kind of the automation when we as soon as we touched it, and then there's going to be no data in between. So their automation look like that, and that's fine. And it has like some really good uses, but occasionally you may want to open up the automation panel at this point, and there's some different options under settings. And if you have kind of a previous versions, you probably have like a little settings cogwheel. down here. And at this time, you could just say, if you just kind of turn off the virgin territory, and now as you write, you could see that you could also just kind of come here, and let me just, and as we would kind of do your different, so let's say if you choose fill gaps, at that point, as we turn off the virgin territories at this point, as I write the automation, it will automatically kind of fill in the values between that. Now, I saw one of the questions asked was how to kind of do a return period. So a lot of times, I'll select let's say I'll just select all of this automation and delete it. So this question I get quite a bit, where if we're doing automation, let's say I want it to be here, and then people stop, and then if they do like just a little bump, that the value doesn't return to the initial value. So it kind of mimics a physical fader that's going to stay there until the automation value is written. One way around this is to just activate to end. So if I get rid of this automation I've written and I just have to end activated, at this point I could just automate the particular parameter. And now that the end was done, it'll actually write an automation value at the very end of the track. So if I needed to just do like a little bump in the automation, that you could do that. Now, subsequently, you could also just kind of come here. So let's say if I just do this within a loop here. So I'll just write my touch automation to end and within the loop. So as soon as you do that, but one clever trick that you could do that was added in 9.5 was just to be able to take, a selected automation range and be able to do this if you wanted to do bumps. So many people will just kind of write automation, from start to end on all of the tracks. And then as you do this, that automation point will be there. And now as you kind of do, depending on, the mode that you're in, you could have that automation point. But so you would kind of need, to have just a point for it to return to. So if you just kind of come here, you could say, now as soon as I go to the touch automation, and as soon as I kind of go right there, I let go, it's going to return to the existing value just like that. All right, we had questions regarding two things with the channel settings. One was how to have the channel settings set to always on top. And it used to be when you right-clicked at the top of the window, you would get the always on top setting so that when you go somewhere else, that this would stay on top. And I think it was in maybe 9.5 or 10 where it's now actually kind of towards the bottom. So a lot of people get this, they click on a track and that would disappear. So now if we just kind of activate this, right click towards the bottom and just activate always on top, we can now just navigate and still have those settings. Now the second kind of related question to the edit channel settings was when I'm here and I want to go to a different track, that I want to see more than one edit channel settings window. So people were frustrated that they could only kind of see, one window at a time. But if you just hold down the Alt key or Option key, you could now, let me just go here. if you hold down the Alt or Option key, you could see multiple edit channel settings, so you could compare different channel settings. So just hold down the Alt or Option key while opening and hitting the Edit Channel Settings button, and that will allow you to open up multiple channel settings. I'm going to take a quick look back. All right, so we're just going to check out some comments. Thanks for everyone's great questions. Okay, so we have a question. I'm just saying how to resize a note without going, is there a way to resize a note without going into extended toolbar? In other words, without a mouse? So let's give it a try real quick here. So let's say if I have a note, so without a mouse, I mean, you could, so some easy ways of kind of extending the length of a note that I do is just kind of here using the scroll wheel. I'm trying to think of ways without. So if I hold down, let me just see if I can do it from a keyboard shortcut, like using the arrow keys. So I'll take this. You can move the notes using kind of keyboard shortcuts. Let me try some different modifier keys. Okay, so if you hold down Alt plus Shift, you could change the length of the notes, and it looks like it might be doing it by the quantize value. So let's say if I do 16th notes, so whatever notes are selected here, you could just, if you hold down just Control, you can shift their position. But if you hold down Alt, let's see what Alt allows you to do. I'll just undo that. But it looks like to shift without using the mouse to change the length of the notes, it's Alt plus Shift plus like the left and right arrow keys like that. So I hope that's kind of what you want it to do. All right, just reading through some of the comments and questions. Okay, so we had a question on the AXR4T, which is our new Thunderbolt 2 audio interface, and that is shipping. So that's a 32-bit A to D converters with sample rates, very high sample rates. So 192, it could even go up to 384 if you need that. With built-in DSP, it has the Rupert Neve Silk mic pre circuit. On the 4 mic pre's, it also has 8 analog line level inputs and outputs, plus 16 channels of ADAT or AES EBU digital connections, 2 headphone outs, MIDI. So it is shipping. And I think Sweetwater did a video on it. So if you go to sweetwater.com and look on their YouTube channel, you could check out their review of the AXR4T. It is brand new, so we just started shipping it less than a month ago. So I've seen emails for more review units kind of going out, so look for that. But I think we were able to get kind of an early version to Sweetwater. So you may want to check out their website and their YouTube channel. Okay, so there's a question. I have a question. Is there a plugin scanner? So if you go to the plugin manager. So if you go to VST plugin manager here, you could see kind of all of your plugins in your system. You could also see plugins that are blacklisted, and these are plugins that are deemed to potentially cause stability issues, and perhaps 32-bit plugins. So you may see some blacklisted as well. And you also get the ability to create your own collections. So if you say, I wanted to just come here and these are my favorite mixing plugins versus all of my plugins, and you could organize your own folders for VST effects as well as VST instruments independently. So this will allow you to kind of scan through all of your plugins. And the first time you start Cubase, it'll actually do an analysis. You may notice it takes a little longer the very first time when you start Cubase, and that's because it's actually doing kind of a plugin scan for kind of the integrity of the plugin and measuring the latency of each plugin. So as we work with that, you kind of see those results automatically reflected into the VST plugin manager. So as we come over here, that's accessed again by going to your studio menu or your devices menu on previous versions, like of I think it's 9 and earlier. So just go to your VST plugin manager. All right, so he said, how do you get all the tools when you press the right buttons on a mouse? So let's go ahead and take a quick look at that. So one of the changes, some people want to know, like some of the tools will have multiple functions, and sometimes people have a hard time figuring out how to access those, like the drawing tool, the line tool. So if you hover over with the right mouse button and then tap and hold the left mouse button, you could switch to different modes of different tools like that. So once again, just kind of right click, hover, and then left click, select which of the tool modes that you want. And then that's all you have to do with that. And that's how you could see all of the different functions and within the tools as well. And if you just kind of click here, you could also within the toolbars kind of see the different modes, but just with the toolbar by right clicking with the tools, again, just come here, right click, and just hold down the left mouse button. All right, I'm just going to kind of jump back here in time. Thanks for all the wonderful questions. So I see a quick question. If I buy Cubase Pro 10, will I be able to use older versions like 8 or 9? The Cubase 10 license allows you to run the previous versions, 8, 9, 8, 7, 6. So yes, you're able to run the previous versions with your Cubase 10 license. Okay. So I see a question wondering if there have been any more developments or fixes for Cubase 10 working with Isotope RX. So I know a lot of people that are using it. Isotope, I think a lot of people had run into situations where some of the plugins were blacklisted, but you should be able to do it, and especially when you get into like the direct offline processing. So you should be able to kind of see that's where a lot of people would do kind of RX style work. But I think that a lot of people were kind of shocked that a lot of their Isotope plugins were blacklisted, and I think there are some updates. I haven't run that in a while. I don't have current licenses for Isotope, but I haven't really. I know that there were some issues with it initially working with some of the like very first direct offline processing for RX2, but I think it's been resolved, and I think it was just kind of on the Isotope side, but I'm not 100% sure. All right, so we have someone from Iran, all right, New Haven, Connecticut. Okay, so we'll go through some more questions. It says, I have a question. If I import a stereo track already within a project, how can I separate that track into two mono tracks? So let's say if I want to take this particular track, and I wanted to split this to two monos. In Cubase 10, it's really easy in a new function in the project menu called convert tracks. So we could say multi-channel to mono. And at this point, we could say I want to do the selected tracks, or you could do all multi-channel tracks if you want to. So if you have a number of different tracks, you could choose to delete the source tracks, keep them, mute them, or put them into a new project. You could also have different naming conventions as well. So let's say if I just choose to mute the source tracks, I hit OK. And then at this point, we just have, let me just do a new file here. So take this, we'll select just the track here. And you can see that now the left and right channels have been split automatically. So that's a pretty easy way. So once again, go to your project menu to convert tracks. And this is in Cubase 10. If you have a previous version, what some people will do is import the track. So if you import the audio file, that way you could choose to, sometimes you could have the option, and this could be a preference that sometimes gets turned off. So let's say on import audio files, if you have open options dialog, you could also just come here, and this is a way with previous versions that some people would do, is just say, okay, I want, and at this point you could choose to split channels, and you could put them onto different tracks, and you could have your drums kind of automatically split like that as well. If the stereo file is already in a project and you don't have that within, you're not importing it, but it's already resident within the project, you could do a file to export audio mix down. And then when you do that, just simply, do left and right channels, or you could split the channels and choose different naming formats like that. Okay, just reading some of the questions. Okay, question, bounce stems, record companies always need all the stems broken down. What's the easiest way, where I can go drink a cup of coffee and while the program does the job? So if we have, I'll just open up kind of a larger project here. And depending how you want to, deliver the particular file, so let's say if we have our drums, let's say kind of a typical drum bass guitar. So if you go to your file to export audio mixdown, at this point, you could just choose to say export multiple channels. You want to choose the file path here. So I've also had a couple questions about people not being able to kind of see the full file path. I haven't had any problems with that. I've gone let's see, just here it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I could probably get 7 or 8 different levels of folders. And what you want to do is to just say, okay, I want all of my output channels, my instrument tracks, all of my audio channels, my effects. And at this point, you could just perform an audio export, and this will automatically make stems of everything. So a lot of people will just simply come right here and do the output channels. I know a lot of composers will set everything up for their group channels. So, if they have, let's say, all the drums going to a particular group, I'll just open up another project that will probably have some more grouping. Let me just see if I have something that's a good example. This would be kind of a good example of this. And what they've done here in this example is they've set up different groups for vocals, for effects, for, drums and guitars and keys. So when we open this up, so it's like kind of a large project. So when we go to the export audio mixdown, we could choose export multi-channels, and we can see you could just give the record company groups. A lot of people do that as stems, and depending on how you have it bust out, you could have the effects channels, the VST instruments, all of your audio channels as well. And this will make equal length audio files that the record companies will love you for, because they'll be able to actually open it into any program, and it makes it a bit operating system independent, application independent, and this will just kind of make stems for you. So just go to your file to export audio mixdown and choose to export multiple channels here. In previous versions, prior to 10, it was called the batch export. All right, let's go through. All right, so we have a question from Sweden. So it says, I want to ask if Variaudio can become a plugin or DLC to Elements. It is sought after. So if you wanted to kind of do a lot of Variaudio stuff, a lot of people say, oh, just get a plugin, but you could upgrade to the full version of Cubase and kind of get the functionality of the Variaudio capability. So that may be kind of a better approach than investing additional money in plugins. One thing, I think you get this plugin within Elements if you go to, while it's not an editing scenario, but if you go to pitch shift, that you could go to the pitch correct plugin. And this works quite well for kind of real time, just kind of turn it on. But if you're thinking of, wanting to buy the Variaudio as a plugin, just simply upgrade to, to the Cubase Pro, because you'll get that and so much more. Even if you just have Elements, by the time you get that and some of the other plugins and the capabilities, that's probably your best financial move to do. So think of that. Okay, so question. I have Cubase 10, don't know how to update greeting. Don't know how to update. Maybe if you could just specify a little more. Is from a question from Jens Queso from Albania. So if you could check that out. If you could maybe specify a little more what you're having problems updating to. All right, question. Hi, Greg. When using Loop Mash, what's the best way to record it to my track? So, Loop Mash is just an instrument that will respond. So there's two ways that you could use Loop Mash. One is, you could do various functions. Let's say if I wanted to, let me just look for a quick project. We'll start if you're using it as a virtual instrument, is that you could just sequence the different events. So we'll come over here and we'll just go to our loop mash. So as you do this, you can have kind of your MIDI keyboard actually, control the different functions kind of within loop mash. So we could do just these particular functions that will respond to the correct octave on your MIDI controller. So I don't think my MIDI controller is hooked up, but you could just sequence these different scenes to do this. Now, there's also different performance controls, and these will just be from different responding to MIDI note messages. So if you have a track for loop mash. Now, some people run loop mash as a particular effect plugin for doing kind of like DJ style work. So let's say if I wanted to, let's see if we can find a project that would be apropos. I think I may have a loop mash project here. Okay. And if you do this, let's say we go to loop mash. And again, there's two different ways because loop mash can be used as an instrument to kind of mash different content and loops together and base the timing of one part and have others follow that accordingly. But we could also just run it. So if I come here, we could also have loop mash where we could just trigger this from MIDI. And again, this could be played. So all these will respond to MIDI notes, or you could just choose to automate loop mash here. So now if I just rewind everything I just did, is just automate it and record it. So you can play it in real time or just choose to automate it, the plugin, as kind of typically expected. So I hope that makes sense. Okay, so we have a question, any news on the Aura development front? So right now, I think it's in testing, so we should see it probably, next couple months. So it's being actively worked on as we speak. So, and we'll see that within the 10.0 product life cycle here. All right, next question says, Okay, it says, Greg, for some reason, some folders in my favorites tab in left bin are not reading when I click on them, not showing any content inside. Help. All right, so let's take a quick look. And I think this is probably regarding like Media Bay. So if we go to Media Bay, you could actually, one thing that a lot of people miss is if you kind of go to the different setup is if you go to kind of the navigation window, you probably want to see, like the file browser here. So if what you want to do is to make sure that you have kind of like, your different folders here. So if I wanted to make a particular plugin kind of like a favorite, what you could do at this point is, just kind of, I think if you right click on a folder, you could say add favorite. So we'll just call this Blockbuster. I'll just call this Feb 2019. We'll give it a new name. So now when I go to my media bay here, we could go to my favorites, and now kind of all those samples will kind of be there. If for some reason that's not working, what you may want to do, if it's kind of lost its connection, you may want to just kind of come over here and just right click and choose to rescan the disk. And that will probably reestablish the connection. And at that point, that I would try that first and see if that does it. And I think that might do the trick for you. Okay, so I'm reading questions. It says the right click feature, which shows function, etc. on 10.5, I think it's probably 10.0, does not have the 9.5 feature notes of selecting notes within notes of the same octave. So it's probably just going to, let's say if I will find just a quick MIDI part here. And let me just make this larger so we could maybe see it a little better. Okay, I'll just duplicate this. So if you just hold down, one way of doing it, so I think it was, some of the right click functionality that you have here. So if you hold down, like usually by default, you'll have the tools, but if you hold down like option, or I think it's maybe control on PC, but you could just right click and say select equal pitch all octaves, or select equal pitch same octave. So if you come here, you could just say, you could also hold down just the shift and double click, and that will select all the values of the same note. But it looks like kind of, I know that some of the settings have changed from the previous version where you could have the option to see both your tools and context sensitive menu functions. But here, if I hold down the option key, I could choose to select, some of the additional functions here. So, we could have kind of the control key, which would just kind of give you some options here, and this is on Mac. But the option, which is probably the Alt key on PC, would allow you to kind of have more context-sensitive functionality. So I would try that and see if that does a trick for you. But if you have kind of like, the same note in different pitches and you wanted to select all those, just simply hold down Shift and double click, and I will select all the notes that are on that particular pitch. So give that a try and let me know how that works out for you. All right, so we have Alex, who's brand new to Cubase, coming from Pro Tools. Welcome to the Hangout. If you have any questions, hope to see you there. Hope to see any questions you might have so we can help you transition. All right, so we had a question: how to overcome disk preload problems. Depending on the material, and if you're streaming, 3,200 tracks, from different sample slave instruments, there are, people's needs can vary. But one thing that you could do is if you come here to the VST audio system, there is, you could adjust disk preload here for, especially you're doing like large audio tracks and maybe you have kind of a slower hard disk or an older one that's, hasn't been defragmented in a long time. So you could adjust kind of disk preload here. And, depending on your computer, make sure that, you have your ASIO guard turned on, that multi-processing is checked. And on the Windows, you may see an option for use Steinberg power scheme. That could also help quite a bit. So I would check those different components. And again, it's under the studio menu in version 9 and earlier. It's under device setup. So we could just go under your VST audio system and check those settings there. So I see a question from Tom about smart tempo. So I'm not sure what that's referring to. So maybe if you could elaborate a little bit. But there are a lot of smart tempo things like automatic tempo detection. But maybe if you could elaborate a little more, that would be great. All right, so we see question from Taylor: is there a way to remove a pencil tool edit on a clip? So let's see if this is going to be kind of more audio based. So let's say if I grabbed a pencil tool, and I'm not sure if this is for the volume. Let me just make this larger so it's a little more obvious to see. All right, so this will allow you to adjust kind of volume changes. So if you hold down, if you just kind of select it here, it can be moved. Let me try just a couple modifier keys. So I think I'm sure there's some way of, let me just try selecting just the event. I'm sure there's some way I'm just kind of having a brain cramp on it, but this would allow you to adjust the volume. And let me just see if there's... Okay, so what you could do, sorry, I just figured it out. So if you now have a clip, if you hold down while the pencil tool is selected and hold down the shift key, that will allow you to just change and erase those particular clips. So you have to have the pencil tool selected, then hold down the shift key, and that turns into an eraser so that you could erase the different clip gain automation. So if that's not the part that you're referring to, Taylor, just let me know. But I think that is what's going on. All right, I'm going to jump back to some of the other questions that were sent in earlier. Okay, so someone was commenting that they're having problems kind of using the custom metronome sounds and being able to access them. So if you're not familiar with this, Like this is kind of your default Cubase metronome, but if we go to your metronome setup, you could go to click sounds, and there's, sometimes people will just use the Steinberg click sound. You could also load in your own custom sounds, but there's different presets. So I'll just turn this up a little bit so you can maybe hear it a little better. So again, if we go to click sounds, you can say, okay, I want clave A or egg shaker, different wood blocks. And if you want kind of like a classic Yuri, you could go to vintage spike. I have seen it happen to me once where these sounds stopped working, and I just reset my preferences by starting the program, holding down like Alt Control Shift or Command Option Shift, and deleted the preferences, and my click track sounds that maybe got corrupted or lost, and this was only once in 9.5 that it happened to me, were restored. So if you run into issues like that, that's something to investigate and check out. All right, so question, how do we get the Q sends in the lower zone for setting up different scenarios here? So if you get, so what you can see in the lower zone is kind of an abbreviated set of the mixer. So here we could see our inserts and our sends, but the Q sends aren't visible in the lower zone. You'd have to go to kind of the full mixer console view to go directly to our Q sends there. And if we see kind of the Q sends, we could just activate it. I was at Junkie XL's studio before NAMM, and this is a question that he ran into. I just got a call like a minute or two before the hangout about where the racks are, because the rack location in previous version was on the left-hand side, and this had moved over to the right-hand side. So at this point, here you could turn on and off different parts of the racks to be visible just there. So if you don't see your Q sends, just do it there, but you can't access the Q sends from the lower zone. That would be just from the extended mixer. I'll pass that on as a feature request, just so it would be handy. I could see the benefit of having it in the lower zone as well. Okay, let's go to just another project here real quick. Okay, so it says, yesterday I was tracking a 5-piece band, 24 channels in Cubase Pro 10. Whenever I finish a song, I built a template from that song using a macro described in a previous Hangout. But as I went to create the next song using the template, it took a long time to load. Seemed like waiting 5 minutes, then eventually it opened. Do I have any idea what took so long and what to do about it? I don't know why it would take so long to do that. Sometimes I've seen where it's looking, when I've encountered that, it's, I can see sometimes there's a window open in the background that isn't as obvious, maybe looking for particular content that will just kind of, not be found, and kind of wait for you to say skip or ignore. Or locate. So I've seen that happen without it being like really obvious or apparent. So that's something to look into to see if there's any open dialog windows in the background. Okay, next question. If you swipe using a mouse or trackpad over a parameter in the mix console, are you able to change the parameter without having to click on it first? So if I'm here in the mix console, And so if I go to, so I don't have to click on the parameter to control it directly in Cubase in the mix console. And this causes, so some people love this, that you could just simply kind of hover over and you could see whatever is kind of framed is being adjusted. So if I wanted to go to my EQ, I could just come here, I could, activate, and let's say if I wanted to adjust the EQ, I could just do this all from my mouse. And I think there's another question in the Hangout about, can you just turn this off because it's too easy when wanting to scroll? That, people easily just inadvertently move a fader value or a value that they don't want to. So currently, and it's just kind of an operating system issue that, whatever you're kind of over your scroll wheel will control. If you accidentally do that, you can go to the edit history here and adjust directly back. But I will pass it on for maybe a preference for, mouse scroll wheel doesn't adjust parameters in the mix console or does, and that hopefully can make people happy with that. So we had a question if I own the white Magic Mouse from Apple. It says the white Magic Mouse scroll wheel is done by swiping your index finger up and down on the surface of the mouse. No physical scroll wheel like PCs. So when I'm moving the mouse pointer across the mix console without clicking on anything, and if my index finger moves even in the tiniest bit, it will inadvertently change a parameter or whatever is over that split second. It says it could be anything in a mix console plug and insert EQ value. Have you experienced this at all? And why is it so easy to do this by mistake? Shouldn't it be traditionally you hover over a parameter, then you must click for it to be able to change the value? It says, I can't imagine I'm the only Cubase Mac user who has this issue and haven't gotten great responses over the forum or Get a Real Mouse. It is a noted problem in the design of the Apple Magic Mouse. And if you say, if you Google it, say Magic Mouse problems, people in other programs, you see lots of complaints from people in Adobe doing that. And I think once you switch to, I had the same problems with my Magic Mouse. I found it annoying just because, of that particular issue. It's, I think it's a bad design. I know it's convenient, but, when I switched out for a $15 Logitech, everything kind of worked as expected. And it's not only in Cubase where this problem occurs, but, many, many other programs have this issue. So, so I think it's kind of not not much we could do because of how precise the mouse is and how sensitive it is, and you can't really adjust that within the parameters. Okay, so, and we're getting back, it says, what would I do in this situation? A band is coming to record 6 songs. Each of the 6 songs uses a backing track and has a specific different BPM tempo. You want to have all 6 Cubase projects ready to go when the band arrives. So you want to have backing tracks all imported, as well as have the BPM determined and all lined up in a grid for easy editing. Now, when a band arrives and does a sound check, you get all the recordings set and all the appropriate inputs determined in the first song created. The band does great and finishes the first song and wants to move on to the second song to record. You open up the second project with its backing track and specific BPM, but it has none of the headphone cues, recording levels, or inputs set as in the first song. None. But you had to create all the songs ahead of time so the band could go from one song to the next. The question is, what would I do in this situation? How can you apply all the additions made to the first song to the second and third, and so on? This is where my idea would be for a Cubase command of update existing template to a song that had already been made by the template. So if we have, one thing I've done in this scenario is, let's say we have a number of cues set up like we see here is I would just quickly select all of my cues here. I'd select all the tracks, go to this little drop down menu and say save selected channels. So we'll call this so we could just save this, and I'll just save it to my Cubase projects folder. And now let's say if I reverted it to like my template or my preset song. And let's say we go to our cue mixes here. So we'll say go to our cues and nothing is set. I could select the first track. Come there, and let's say I'll just go to load mixer, load selected channels. And we'll go to our Feb Hangout mix. And then everything could be restored that way. You could, select, just do a select all and delete and hit record again and save as, save new version and then start recording. So that's another method, but, check out to see if using the save mixer, save selected channels will do the trick, because that will restore all the cue mixes. All right, let's go on to some other questions. All right, so we had a question. Is there a way to have multiple versions of the tempo track? It's a great question. So let's say we added, I'll just revert this very quickly. Okay, so if I come here and I have, we'll just do a quick tempo track here. Okay, so what we could do with tempo tracks is you could actually have a new version of the tempo track. And you can say, we'll activate our tempo here. And now we could say, let's come here, and you see just in a drop down, we could have different track versions. And now we could just simply kind of come here, and you could see multiple tempo tracks within one single project. And if you wanted to, you could kind of create a master tempo track full of, the tempos from one track version, from their track version, and assemble them quite easily. So we have a question: if you move an insert effect from a mono track to a stereo track, will it function in stereo? Yes, the inserts will kind of function on whatever track configurations that they're on. So no problems with that. So if you have it on mono track, it'll do that. It'll be on a 5.1 or quad track or stereo track. All right, we had a question about is it possible to create a macro or to render MIDI drums, but first split the drum track into separate tracks by pitch, then render them to audio? I do all this manually. So let's take a quick look. All right, so let's just say I'll just find a quick pattern here. Okay, so let's say I'll just kind of drag this particular pattern over. Okay, so let's go ahead and we'll just kind of loop this. Okay, so at this point, let's say I wanted to kind of split out some of these. Now, the rendering in place often kind of works by, one thing that you could do, and this, I don't think this will help, but if you go to your MIDI and then just choose to dissolve part, I could separate the pitches independently. So we come here, and now it's taken the individual drums and kind of map them into their own, where each drum sound will have its own event. So as I come here, let's just see what happens if I try to render these in place. So at this point, I'll just choose to do dry channel settings. All right, so now I'll just listen to some of my different parts. So just a kick. It's probably the overhead, the snare. So that way, that's one way of doing it. Let me just make sure I'm reading the question right. So yeah, so again, all I did was from the original part here, where I had a number of different elements, is just to select that, go to your MIDI, choose to dissolve the part, separate the pitches, and this will actually it's a little odd that it will load up the particular instruments, but at this point, if I just say we're going to go to render in place, and we could actually go to different settings here where, as we kind of do this, we could choose to, have different tail modes, and, you could just simply come here, and if you wanted to, let's just say, select all of these files, and we go to the render in place, and we go to the render settings. At this point, we could, and if I don't have these events selected, so if I have the particular tracks selected, at this point, when I go to render in place and go to render settings, you could remove the source tracks and just hit render. And then you just have all of your different audio tracks just laid out for you right there. So that's kind of a pretty easy way of doing it. And if you look, that's now you just have those rendered as a particular audio file, and you have, and it's just kind of done that easily. So hope that makes sense. And if you wanted those to be mono, you could send the different instruments to a mono output. It doesn't have to be defined to any physical connection, so you could do that as well. All right, so in Halion Sonic SE, when several channel slots are loaded with sound, is there a way to remove one or all of them from the slot? So let's take a look. I'll just go ahead and load up some different sounds here. Okay, so if you wanted to remove particular sounds, I think if you just right click and just click to remove program. So select the slot here, right click, and you could choose to cut the program or just remove program like that. All right, next question. Is there a way to import tracks from a template like you can from another project? There isn't a direct way to do that, but what you could do is just simply, take your project, import the template, save it as a project, and then from that point, a lot of times what I do is I actually save, for this kind of scenario is I will save all the templates as a project as well. And I have it kind of in a different folder. So if I needed to automatically import those, but there isn't a way to directly do it. But if you just open up the template, do a save as, then at that point you could take, all of your different tracks from that template and import them just by going to your file, import tracks, not only from that, but you could just say import tracks from project, select a particular project, and then you could see all of the tracks. So it's kind of a two-step process instead of importing independent tracks from templates directly. Question, is there a way to tag sounds? So within the media bay, if you come here, any of your sounds that you have, sorry about that, must be quite jarring. So if I just wanted to listen to particular sounds, if we come over here to the settings window, and let's say we go to the right zone, here you could actually, when you click on the settings, there's a number of different tagging options here. So a number of different criteria for the media name, rating, project, family name. If you don't find a particular parameter that's applicable to your needs, there's a lot of these for musical and post-production and plugin names. What you could do is actually click on the plus sign and you could add your own user attributes. And when you add your own user attributes, you could then search by those. So again, make sure that you have kind of the right-hand side enabled here. And then on the attribute inspector, just come here and then you could choose which. And so most of the common types of attributes, you could just simply choose and select. But you also have the capability of clicking on the plus sign to create your own defined user attributes within the media bay that you could then search for your files based on those. Question, when I enter a note in the stereo out channel on a project window, it doesn't show up in the mixer. So I've heard this from other people as well. So let's come here and we'll just test it just to make sure again. All right, and we'll come over here and let's look at our notepads here. And let me just add I'll add this to a particular file. Yeah, so I'm not seeing it open as well. And I know I passed this on in the past, but I'll kind of reiterate it. And I'm sure it's something that could be simple, but I'm not a software developer. But it seems like an oversight that could be corrected. Question is, I have a problem with the overview. Sometimes it shows my track lanes all very squashed up to the left-hand side, and I can't make them stretch across the whole overview line. So let me switch to kind of a larger project here. Activate this one. Thanks everyone for great questions. Okay, so if you're not familiar with what you could do is kind of have your project overview window here. And kind of on large projects, we can come here. Let me see if there's a way. So you could kind of select different parts. I thought there might be a way to, let me just. So you could select kind of ranges here, but it kind of gives you an overall project view. Let me take a look with a smaller project and see if it kind of behaves similarly. Think that there is a way of doing this. I'm just kind of blanking on it now, how to kind of and let me see if it is tied to the left and right locators. I'll play around with that and see if I could get it figured out, but I see what you mean by that. But I thought that there was a clever way of kind of changing the view. but it may come to me. I'll try to come back to it if it kind of jumps back. Okay, question is, hi, show how reference MIDI tracks work with Variaudio. So let's take a look at that. Okay, so here I have I have my vocal track and I have different MIDI parts here. So let's say if I'm in my Variaudio editor, and we'll just kind of go to the bigger view here. And one of the handy things was the capability of being able to see different MIDI reference tracks. So if we open the Variaudio editor tab here, and we could click on this little show MIDI reference track. At this point, I could say, let's go to, let's see, like if there's a mellotron flute here, I could see like a underlying MIDI part. So if I wanted to make sure that, particular notes were lining up and I wanted to use maybe a piano as a reference track just to determine which pitches were actually being used, or if we have like a melody, here we could actually see like a melody track and how that relates directly to the Variaudio. So this could be used as kind of a reference part. So again, if I come here and let's say, like here's like a mellotron part, I could see which pitches are being used, and I could see the relation between the pitches here from that particular MIDI part, and you could select any of your MIDI parts within your project here as well, and how that's relating directly to the Variaudio. So, and that's a really handy feature, just so as you start moving stuff, you know exactly what MIDI notes are good, and you can say, okay, an F is good, so we know that if a note is here, an F, that would be a good, so we have F and A flat, so we probably have like an F minor chord, so we could then determine which notes are kind of musically correct based on MIDI parts and use that as a reference not only for pitch but also rhythmic timing. So, and again, to activate that, just simply within the Variaudio editor tab, you can click on this icon here, which is to show MIDI reference track, and then you could pick any type of your files to look at. So if you want to look at your string parts, or you want to look at the brass, or look at, piano, or like this has a mellotron part, you could do that as well. Okay, we had a question, hide or show all insert plugins. I noticed something, edit click. So let's say if we had a number of inserts on a particular track. So let's say I have this, and let's say okay, and if I wanted to open all these at once, I think what you could do is if you click here while holding down that's not what I want. Okay, let's try. Trying to remember the keyboard shortcut here. It's like a try and remember. It's like an Alt and click. Don't want to reset. I'm sure there's someone going, just hit this button like this. Okay, so if you hold down, if you click on the name here, I think it's Option Shift. So click on the Edit key. So if you click on the Edit Channel Settings while holding down Alt or Option plus Shift, that'll open up all your inserts. And if you just hold down Shift, that will then hide them. So that's the little secret. So click on the Edit Channel Settings while holding down Alt and Shift, click on the Edit Channel Settings will hide them. All right, question is, I just installed an SSD HD for having audio and sample libraries. How can I move these correctly? There's a little program, let's find it real quick, that's now installed with Cubase. It's called the Steinberg Library Manager. So we'll just kind of come right over here. We could open this up, and this is, again, installed. And at this point, you could just select kind of different components and just choose to move it, and then select your location where you want to move it to, and then that will move the content plus all the links from the software to your different Hallian or Groove Agent or the Grand samples directly to the new location for you. So go to the Steinberg Library Manager and you could just click on Move, and then it'll prompt you where you want all the files moved to, and it'll kind of keep track of all the behind the scenes links between the program, and it'll say, the program will say, look into this folder instead, and then that will kind of make managing your library significantly easier. So, all right, next question. Says, hi, Greg. What ways are there to increase Cubase performance using a lot of instrument tracks? When I open up Cubase projects, it keeps interrupting while loading sounds when playing back. So a lot of times what it could really depend on which particular instruments, so synthesizers, you could think of very roughly as taking more, it can take more CPU cycles. Sometimes reverbs can take more CPU cycles. Some instruments, if you're working with large orchestral libraries and templates, can take more RAM, can be critical, and hard drive speed. So it could really kind of be a balance between those. And some of the settings that we discussed a little bit earlier. So if you go to the studio setup, at this point you could just, make sure that you have the multiprocessing active, that you have ASIO guard. If you're running 32-bit plugins that are bridged, that can cause a lot of CPU overload. You could, adjust your ASIO guard level as well. So those are some things that you could do. Sometimes running everything as a 64-bit processing precision can help somewhat with CPU efficiency, so that plugins that are going 60, that are that everything's working in, that are capable of doing 64-bit calculations, aren't kind of going back to 32-bit when they could be kind of kept full throttle at 64-bit processing. Being able to freeze tracks, one thing that a lot of people miss is, the ability of, if they don't have, particular tracks active, is, just right clicking. Like if you have a template that has a lot of stuff that maybe you aren't using, is just to disable tracks that aren't being used. If you have the option of running in a VST3 engine, so something like Halion, one of the benefits of VST3 is that it won't take CPU cycles as if it's not passing any audio or playing anything. Within different instruments, so let's say if I have a groove agent here, you also will have, some options to, unload unused samples. So like our Halion has a RAM save mode. So if you click on RAM save mode, if you're pretty much finished and you realize that you're using, like let's say in Groove Agent 5 or Groove Agent SE5, you have 32 velocity layers per pad, that you may have a lot of samples are loaded that aren't necessary, that you could just kind of turn on the RAM save mode, and that could unload unused samples. And, you may have 10,000 samples for a particular patch, or, for a template. And if you're only using 500, it doesn't make sense to necessarily have 9,500 unnecessary, unneeded samples loaded. So those are some tips and tricks that you can do to kind of make your CPU more efficient. And of course, SSD drives, having more RAM, having a faster processor, all those things will help as well. But those are some things that could really help in kind of speeding up, maybe on your existing computer. Okay, we have a question. If I will not record, do I need an audio interface? I consider UR22 Mark II. What will it offer me besides recording and I/O? So it will offer a MIDI interface. So if you're playing instruments into it, if you're doing full sequencing, there's probably a good chance you're using virtual instruments, and the virtual instruments will need an audio interface with low latency drivers to work well. So that's where the audio interface can really come in. If you're doing all external MIDI, where you have, 15 hardware synths and you're using all those sounds only, then just a MIDI interface and an external mixer would make sense. You wouldn't necessarily need an audio interface. But if you're using virtual instruments, all the virtual instruments and their latency will be dependent upon your audio interface. So you will benefit from getting something simple like a UR22 Mark II. It's a great interface. And at some point you're going to probably, it's going to be inevitable. You're going to want to sample something. You're going to record a voice or a guitar or bass or the audio from a keyboard performance, or do sound design work. So it's a great device to have for your system. Okay, so we had a question about Sysex messages. I probably don't have any, but if you want to know where to look for Sysex messages, they're going to show up in the list editor. Some people will record Sysex and then find it, it's like, oh, it didn't seem to record or capture. And if you're in that scenario, just go to your preferences and under MIDI filter, and it's by default often that Sysex will be kind of filtered. So, but make sure that you have the Sysex not being filtered on, and then at that point, you'll be able to see all of the Sysex messages directly here within. So if you say, you could actually say, show system exclusive messages, and any Sysex that's been recorded for different, parameters of synthesizers or bulk dumps will all be visible directly within the list editor. So that's probably the best area to look for Sysex messages directly there. Okay, so suggestion box, freeze all instruments and unfreeze. So I see this a lot, and to me it makes a little more sense to do something, where you could say, I want to take these different parts here. And instead, I know people are kind of used to freezing, but I think a lot of people miss the concept that you can select multiple parts here in one kind of fell swoop and choose to go to your render in place. And so if I just do this, we'll say, okay, let's do these as separate events. And at this point, you could choose render, and it'll take those 3 different events or multiple events in your timeline and just automatically render the selected events as audio files. So I think this, to me, freeze is kind of like very 2002 of a workflow, and this makes a lot more sense because you could see kind of like your actual audio files here, and even if I wanted to open up like another project, I'll show you where you can even see it pretty clearly as well. So if we just say, I think I have, we'll come here. So if I just select multiple events here, and then just go to your edit. I'll just do it with current settings. So at that point you have the original file here, you have the audio with the same color, it's muted, so you could just do that for multiple tracks very easily. So instead of like, to me, like I'm, using render in place for multiple tracks instead of like, multiple freeze kind of makes a little more sense and it's a very clean way to work. All right, I'm going to go back to our discussion feed. Thanks, everyone, for wonderful questions. I hope everyone's learning a couple tips and tricks. Okay, just reading through a couple questions here. Okay, so just a question from Ted Martin says, manual quantizing after tempo detection on audio files. Sometimes tempo detect is off, so I've corrected beats by using the warp tool to position beats correctly relative to audio. I then write tempo definition to all my audio files in this session to follow tempo settings. So the question, once I switch away from warp tool after tempo detect, I can no longer warp positions of the beat relative to audio, it seems. Should I be able to get back to the warping beats to audio? I think probably what you'd need to do is, let me just go to a particular file here. Okay, so if I've kind of done this from, let's say, if I do this move where we'll go to our project and let's do our tempo detection. Okay, and let's say we'll put in, so let's say our downbeat. Oh, let me just, sorry about that. Just all right, I'll just restart this. But I think what you're going to need to do is kind of basically flatten the audio file. So I'll show you this real quick. So once we go here, we could say for our project, we'll do our tempo detection. All right, and now let's say I'm putting this tempo. I go to my advanced to say set definition from tempo. So we'll do it for the project only. And then let's say after you've done your tempo changes, and I think it's going to be maybe under process, just try choosing flatten. So that will kind of render a new file, and then you'd be able, and you may have to kind of do this multiple times. I'm not absolutely sure, but I think if you choose flatten at that point, you could go back to warping beats to audio. And it's not kind of doing it in real time. That will kind of process the warped audio file. So just try from the sample editor under process, flatten, and let me just see if it's possible to select multiple files here. No, so you may have to do it for all the tracks individually. But I think once you choose to flatten from the sample editor, that will allow you to do what you want to do, Ted. Okay, we have a question on chord pads. It says the pitch bender on my controller changes the inversions on all the pads and messes up my custom chords. How to stop? All right, so let's say if we have our chord pads here. So if we go to kind of our So if we go to our tension modifiers here, you probably have the tension modifiers or one of these set to pitch bend. And probably if you just select no modifier or controller and have it mapped to controllers, I'm just going to reread the question. So it changes the inversions on. So I think that it's going to be, one of these. All right. So see our different sections. So I would try kind of right here. So you may have to activate the chord modifiers or deactivate that, but I bet one of these will be set to pitch bend for you. So try that. So, and it could be I think that would kind of do the trick for you. Okay, so we have a question. What's the deal with some Cubase 10 users having lots of issues when some of us, me included, don't? There's a zillion variables in creating a DAW from different components, different levels of operating systems, and different variants with updates, third-party audio audio interface drivers, MIDI interface drivers, plugins. So there's lots and lots and lots of different variables. So we try to do as much testing as possible, but just sometimes we don't have a combination of different things. So, but generally, if you're running 64-bit, if you're running VST3, those will be more stable and have better better stability overall than trying to I have friends that still like, oh, this is my favorite organ plugin I've been using since 1997 and still trying to get that to work in 2019. And it's great that you can still do it through different bridging techniques, but that does come at the expense. So so it says, will Cubase ever allow us to use it without a dongle? The Cubase Elements version currently doesn't run. It runs on a soft E licenser, and a lot of the newer programs like, the Halion and Groove Agent 5 can run, and Dorico can run on soft E licenser that don't require a dongle. I'm sure that there's teams that are doing research on future, licensing systems that may or may not involve a dongle. But nothing to really announce it's only pure speculation on my part. Okay, go through some more questions. So the comment is, this might be a bit out of scope for this stream, but any info if ASIO Guard will work any better with the upcoming VE Pro? So I'm not sure what's coming in the upcoming VE Pro. So we might have to wait for it to come out. I actually don't have a copy of VE Pro. I have to see if I can get a license of it to play around with it. But I don't know of anything that, I'm sure that there will, I know that the two companies are in communications, but I'm not sure what new will be coming in the upcoming version. Okay, so it says, hello, Greg, greetings from Argentina. Always wanted to visit there. How can I quantify the duration of notes in different musical values, for example, quarter notes, eighths, etc.? Okay, so if we have a MIDI part, just quickly add an instrument track here. Okay, so let me just get to my connections here real quick. Okay, so if you want to, so there's some different modes that you could use, like especially if you're doing kind of step input mode. So with step input, if you kind of come here and activate the little stair steps, we can now just kind of come here and, you could, just do it based on kind of your quantize length. So if you come here, you could say as you put in whole notes, and if you're not familiar with like the step sequencing, but this would kind of work, as I come here, let's just activate this particular track and let's see if I have this. Okay, so this is just putting in quarter notes as we do this based on my quantized value. So as I come here, and if I say, okay, let's put in eighth notes. So now one thing that you could do is a missing key command that a lot of people miss. And if you wanted to do this, I think it's like, so you could change the quantized values here, but there's also kind of like an set insert length. So if we hit like option 1 or option 2, option 3, option 4, so just holding down like alt or option 1 would give you whole, option 2 half, quarter for 3, etc. So those are some different keyboard shortcuts. And there's also, if we wanted to look at it, when we come to your key commands, not only do you have that, but you could toggle dotted values and triplet values. So that's a good, if you're doing step sequencing, you want to set different rhythmic values. Check out the set insert length. So the option +1, that will allow you to change kind of the rhythmic properties as you wanted to draw notes in or just use step sequencing. Again, activate step sequencing just by turning on this little icon here and then setting option, and you could see it kind of changing directly here as I hit my different numbers. So if I just want to put in a bunch of eighth notes, and then I have my virtual keyboard turned on, it'll just kind of insert those particular lengths. And let's say I come here, let's put in, so you could change accordingly. So check that out and see if that kind of does what you want it to do. Okay, question. How can I manually add or delete slice points in Groove Agent? So let's take a look at that. Okay, so let's say if I come here to Groove Agent, I drop that directly onto a pad. I'll go to my slice editor. We'll create slices. So I think if you try to remember what the key command is here. So we could adjust the slice. Let me just. see what if I find a keyboard shortcut. I'm trying to remember what it is. I know there's a way of doing it. I'm just kind of having a brain cramp on it. But I'll see if I could circle back to that. If not, I'll try to put it into the next Hangout. But I'm pretty sure there's a way. I'm just trying to remember what the... Yeah, let me just take one. I think let me just try. Well, I'll see if I could come back to that. Sorry, I'm just having a brain cramp on that. All right, so we have a question. Is there any type of tab to transient function in Cubase? So let's say if I'm here, I think it's just going to be... Oh, didn't like that. I think it's just... trying to remember what the something N and B. Not that. So if you just hit Option, it's probably Alt on PC, but Option N for next transient and Option B. So if I come here, let's say if I have this selected, so Option N, Option B. So that's kind of like a find next transient. So we have a question: why can't we have beat making videos on Cubase channel like Ableton and NI guys make? There are beat making videos, so you may want to just kind of go through a lot of them. But there's a video on Beat Designer, and there's some others on the drum editor as well. All right, question: Can you describe how to save all settings, recall key commands, the VST connections, preferences? I can make presets for them, but I've had a crash recently that requires me to reinstall clean. So the best way of doing this is to just come over here and go to edit, and what you could do is, or under the file, or it might be under, let me just find it, where is it? Profile manager. So under the edit menu, go to your profile manager and just simply save your profile here. And that way you could actually save kind of all your settings. I think everything you described is included within the profile, so that you could go to another room and have all your macros, your key commands, your presets, everything stored within your macro, and you could import and export those. So that's the best way of kind of transferring everything over from a previous system or doing a clean install, is just to, again, go to your edit menu and go to your profile manager. And then just export that. Or if you have multiple operators working in your studio, in your facility, you could just simply, at that point, each person, each editor, each programmer, each composer could have all of their own, everything kind of set up exactly how they want, without having to undo or come up with kind of house rules for different types of editing tasks and preferences. You know, they could be personalized without going crazy. So I see that you mentioned user profiles, but yeah, the user profiles will do that, but that'll have all of your key commands. So maybe you didn't save it correctly, but definitely the user profiles will do that. Okay, just reading through the different comments. Okay, so seeing a question: when do the new Mac OS X 10.14 drivers for the MR816 come? The quick select buttons and FireWire connection at all only works on 10.6.8 at the moment. And it says the 3 8-channel interfaces weren't that cheap. I'm still using them on my Windows PC on my laptop. I haven't had a FireWire connection on my Mac in a while, but I thought that everything was still working. So you should make sure that you have the latest extensions installed. I'm not saying that it doesn't work, but I haven't heard of that from a lot of other users. Are still running them every day on the Mac. But I will see if I could get a USB-C to Thunderbolt and I could test it. But it seems, I know on my PC it's still working great. And usually if something doesn't work, you could always contact Apple as well and see why, things have changed, from every operating system. But, I know that's likely not to get you an answer, but I will see if I could get a FireWire USB-C device to test it. So if you want to email me, you could send it to, Giondo at Yamaha.com, and I'd be happy to test, but it may take me a week or so before I get the converter dongle. Okay, so a question from Richard Thompson. Is there a way to set Cubase where I can play in a set scale, like blues scale, etc., on the white keys, but without the notes being the same? So let's go ahead and show you how you could do that. So let's say if I have a MIDI track. And what you could do is go to the input transformer, which is this little squiggly icon right here. And we can set that for local. And one of the things you want to do with the input transformer is to actually make sure that the module is turned on. So we want to transform incoming notes. And we want to make sure that the value 1, which is going to be the pitch of a MIDI note message, and we can set transpose to scale, and we could say C blues 1 scale. And now any note that you play will automatically be transposed to that particular scale that you've defined. So once again, go to the input transformer, and this will actually do it on the input. You could set it to local. At the top, you make sure that you could have 4 different modules activated, but make sure that you have one of the modules activated. Type is equal to note, and the action target and different MIDI messages will have different value 1, value 2, etc. But value 1 will be on a MIDI note message, the pitch, value 2, the down velocity, and value 3, the release velocity. And we can say transpose under operation, transpose to scale, set the tonal center of the key and of the scale and which particular scale you want it to be. And then as you play in, all the notes that you play will be transposed directly to that scale in real time. All right, so I see Stanley from Poolsville, Maryland is online. We have someone else from New Jersey. I think someone's saying my voice is ugly. Sorry. Okay, so we had a question about the chord pads. It says, hey, Greg, I'm still having trouble getting the section feature working on the chord pads. The orange keys are not showing still. You mind showing me how to activate them in real time, please? So let's go ahead and go back to our chord pads. Okay, so let's go to our settings page here. So okay, so this has changed kind of slightly from the different. Okay, let me just find this really quick. So once we go to the player modes here, you can switch it from playing chords to sections. And what this will allow you to do is to actually take these different, you could play the chord here from the chord pad. And at this point, you could play the individual notes within a chord. So on player modes, you want to make sure that you have sections turned on. So if it's just set to playing chords, those won't be visible. And this is slightly different in version 9.5, which is kind of a graphic user interface enhancement in 10. But that's how you could do it directly inside of Cubase 10. Okay, so we have a question. How do I get back to the file browser when using Groove Agent to preview drum sounds? It currently opens the app interface. So let's say if I come here to Groove Agent. All right, so there's a couple different ways. So if you want to just, you can come here and just kind of load your different instrument sets. So let's say if I go to laser beams here, I'll just go ahead and open this. So when I am coming here, let's say if I'm just kind of playing back different patterns. So we just start with another file here. So let me just, I think I have it set up here. Okay, so let's say if we're here and I have, all right, so the question is about how do I get back to the file browser when using Groove Agent to preview drums? So if you click here, you could just kind of click on this little folder icon. The file browser will just, and this is in Groove Agent 5, and here you could just say I'm looking for different instruments. So if I want to take the kick, I can say let's go to different kick drums. And if we just solo the kick, so you could just kind of have the browser just open right there. You could also just kind of, so there's, depending on the version that you have, previous versions it was slightly different, but if you're running 5, that's all you'd have to do. All right, we have someone from Benghazi, Libya. It's great to have you on board. So the question is, hi, how can I have 2 warp affecting 2 tracks at the same time? Let's say I recorded a guitar with 2 microphones and I want to make free warp adjustments that apply the same to the 2 tracks. So currently this isn't really, we have warping on a single track, but one thing that may help in this particular situation, let me just find a quick project where this could make sense. So while you can't do it at the same time, one thing that was added in 10 that can make this a little easier, and you could do it with multiple guitars or multiple voices, is if I select like 2 vocal parts here, and then let's say I just hit Command E, we could see this in the audio editor. And let me just select maybe a different part here, one that's slightly different. But at this point, you could choose to show all of the selected parts. So let me just say I'll do this and this, and we'll hit Command E. So you could see kind of different color parts like that. So that could be, and what you could do is as we go to warp, so let's say if you wanted to do free warp, at this point you could just say, okay, I wanted to move and edit, this particular, I can move the green parts and have that line up. A lot of people will also just use kind of, in lieu of this, just use the audio alignment panel and say, I want this to, these two, if you're looking for it to line up rhythmically, you could do that. But with two different guitar parts, you may just have to kind of look at this, and you could flip which part is actively being edited against the other one just by clicking here. So I know it's not ideal doing kind of both tracks simultaneously, but that could make it a little easier for you. All right, well, I see someone liked the tip with the multiple channel selections with the Alt key. Glad it was helpful. Okay, it says I have a reference which is too long, big, and I want to slice around markers, then export each slice as WAV file. Could I just export by mixdown? Is there an easy way? So let's say if I just go to a new project here. All right, so let's say I just have kind of a okay, so let's say we have this, and let's say this is our long audio file. I'm just going to reread the question one more time to make sure I'm clear on it. Okay, so I have a reference which is too long and big, and I want to slice around markers, then export each of the slices as a WAV file. So let's say if I come here and I set up different ranges, so I'm going to add a cycle marker. So I'm just going to add a marker track. Okay, and now at this point, I will just add a cycle marker for each of those. Give me 1 second here. Sorry about that. So select this. And then let me just so as I have my cycle markers like this. Okay, so now that I have those set up, what you could do is just come here, and when you do your export audio mixdown, you could just have it between the different cycle markers. And at this point, we can, so we'll just choose that. So that's actually a pretty, pretty conventional way to do that. So, and let's come over here and we'll add to projects. I'll just add it to an audio track. So we'll perform the audio export. And I'll just do it on the stereo mix. So at that point, I could just come here. And I'll take each of those sections if I did everything correctly and export them as separate files. And place them directly into our project window. So we could just do it like that, and I chose to have it split the files in my export audio mixdown. So if I just come here and choose not to split the files, let's just do that one more time. Just So without the split the files, we'll now have 4 separate files. So you go to your export audio mixdown. You're going to do the cycle markers to audio tracks, and we'll add it to our project. And this is really handy if you have, hundreds or thousands of different little sound clips. So we'll copy it to the working directory. And you could see all the different clips done just like that. So that's a fairly easy way. I know some people will come here and, with the range selection, if you go to the range and you could just say crop, some people will do that for, different range selections individually, but probably the cycle marker leaves the original file intact and will make new audio files based on the cycle markers. And to do the cycle markers quickly, if you just kind of select a range with the range selection tool, hit the letter P, and then just click on add cycle marker, and you could make a macro to do that as well, but it's just 2 different mouse clicks there, and that's a pretty fast way of doing it, especially if you have the cycle markers set up already. Okay, so question from Stan. Hi, Greg. On an audio sample, when I duplicate it and do, for example, a reverse effect, why does the original reverse 2? Can you tell me how to get around this, please? When you duplicate the audio file, it's the same audio file. So if you actually, so it's one file that's just being repeated a number of different times. So if I come here, the computer sees this as one audio file that's just, copied like so. So if I come here and, I do a fade in of this particular file. So let's say if I go to my processes and I do a fade in, we could now just come here and that's going to do it to all of the files. Now the trick to do this is a preference. And it's one of those preferences that you kind of turn off once when it's like, don't show me this message again kind of deal. But as we go to your preferences, you could go to on editing audio, and it says on processing shared clips, you could say open options dialog box. So that's what you want to do. Or you could have it automatically create a new version or process the existing clip. So what you want to do is now just come here, open the options dialog. So if I take this particular sound and I reverse it, so I go to audio, processes, reverse, it'll ask you, says the project contains that's the same audio material is used. Do you want to click new version? Then these files will remain intact and just that particular file will automatically be affected, and it's created a new audio file so that the others are completely kind of intact. So just come over here and be cognizant of the preferences under editing audio on processing shared clips to either create a new version, or you could just process the existing clip if you wanted to. So that's where you want to look at to change those settings. But again, it's the program's kind of doing the right thing because you just copied the original file and used it multiple times. Okay, so just seeing question, and let me just see. It looks like it's maybe the second part where I'm not seeing the first part of the question, and it says, I mean, resize in the score editor. So let's take a quick look that so this may be a second part of a question. I missed the first part too, but we'll take a look at it here. All right, so let's say if we wanted to look at this in the score editor, there are a couple ways to, you could zoom in just holding down like the command key with your scroll wheel. If you wanted to resize particular scores, if you go to the score settings, which you get access just by going to the left here of the first stave, then I think we could come here. I think there may be a percentage based. So size here. So say, okay, I want this to be 140% or 70%. So I'm not sure if that's what the question was entailing, but if you go to score settings, to staff, to options, there is a size there. So question, can I get Cubase to work on a specific scale? What you could do is you could set up your scale kind of as part of the chord track. So if you wanted to come here, you could see the scale and you could choose different scales here. So you say, okay, I want it to be, G major, G minor, or whatever that you want it to be. And then as you look at notes, you could colorize, all of your events, based on the chords track. So once you could say colorize based on a chord track, or you could see different, so where green notes are within the scale, blue notes are within, red notes are out of key, and blue notes are kind of within the scale but not within the specified chord. So we could automatically do the input transform like we noticed. We could also just have it snap. You could go to a logical editor in MIDI and have those automatically, again, transposed to scale. But, I know a lot of people that when they start working, if they, are always very concerned about being within the scale or key, but it's perfectly fine. And it's, often, a very interesting thing to have accidentals, and it's very intentional. If you look at Bach pieces or, Miles Davis or the Beatles, they had accidentals. So we don't want to necessarily restrict you to only being in a key, because music has notes that aren't in a key, and that's very typical and expected. But you can do the input transform. You can see visually within the scale, but you could also just do a logical editor and have that automatically work if you really wanted to conform to a particular scale. But again, most music doesn't conform to a scale. There's notes that are out of key, but there's also intentional accidental notes, which are, which make for great, tonalities. Okay, says, hi, how to do cool sidechain by local Cubase VST. So I'll show you this. All right. So one of the things that was kind of nifty within Cubase 10 is kind of a new side chaining paradigm to make it a little easier, because we noticed that a lot of people were tending to get lost in setting up side chaining, because it could be a little, sometimes the routing could be a little mysterious for people, because it was kind of very much following an analog paradigm, but sometimes people wouldn't necessarily make that work for their advantage. So let's say if I want to do some creative side chaining here, one of the things that you could do is also just come here and say, okay, let's listen to this example where we have a kick and it's like a synth bass. So let's say I wanted the bass to kind of compress based on the input of the kick. So what I could do is I'm going to select the synth, and here as an insert we could have a compressor. I'll open up the compressor, and we can see this little icon in a lot of the dynamics and some of the delays where this activates the sidechain. So now this compressor is looking for the input from another track, and this is where people would get lost, because they would have to go find the other track and route it to a sidechain input and route it to this particular compressor on this particular track. But we wanted to simplify that by just kind of coming here, and we could say add our sidechain input, and now what's going to happen is that kick drum, every time the kick comes in, that's just going to sidechain the synth just that easily. Now you could also do some other kind of creative side chaining. A lot of times people with vocals, let's say if I wanted to take just a quick vocal here, this may work. So let me just okay, so I want to just take that track and duplicate it. Okay, and on this track, I wanted to have, let's say, a delay. So let's just put on a mono delay, and let's just make it a quick, like, eighth note delay. So if we play this back, all right, that'd be a little obnoxious. Let's try a dotted quarter delay. Okay, so now what I want to do is this delay has a sidechain. So what I want to do is, we'll just say, and so if we play these two back together, so, one of the things that you could often do is have like one track be like a vocal where there's nothing that really kind of comes in on the particular delay until, let me just, I think since these are all, let me just, all right, let me just see if I can do this one more time. So what this is going to do is actually have the delay come in. So I duplicated the track and I sent the I set it up as a ducking. So you're not going to hear the delay kick in until the original vocal stops. So that's another clever ducking trick that you could do with that. So those are kind of two different examples of kind of creative ducking and side chaining inside of Cubase. Okay, so we had a question. Let's go ahead and add Quick instrument track here real quick. Okay, so the question is, hey Greg, is it possible to change is it possible to change a set of notes in a MIDI editor to another value? For example, I want to change all the C5 to all the C's to F's, maybe in a logical editor. So you could definitely do that. And, one easy way of doing it is like you could select, again, just hold down. And let's say if I have a bunch of these notes, I'll just extend these out to make them a little more obvious. But if you wanted to hold down Shift and double click, you could select all the notes of one particular patch and just change it like that. You could do it in a logical editor if you wanted to, but often, unless you're doing the same thing over and over again, if you're doing it for a drum part, what's really interesting is if you have this set up for a particular drum map. So let's say I have a general MIDI map. You could have an in note and an out note. So if you get like drums from someone and it's like, all of a sudden their snare is firing off a different pitch, you could just simply kind of come over here and change the pitch to remap it. So for drum stuff, I would use a drum editor and just have the separate input note be remapped to an output note. But you could also do it in a logical editor, but that may be, a little, a bit of workaround. But you could also just shift on a particular note and double click, and that would select all the notes on that particular pitch. And from the info line, just kind of come directly here and say, okay, here's the particular pitch, and you could change all those notes just like that. Okay, question. How can I resize the toolbox like the old version? So this is one of the new designs. I've been kind of fighting to get kind of the context-sensitive menus plus the toolbox back, so it's all kind of unified. I think we may see it coming in a future version. I'm not absolutely sure. But currently you could have kind of the toolbox or kind of context-sensitive functions when you hold down control. So I kind of miss it myself personally, so I understand the desire and want to have that particular functionality back. Okay, we have a question. If we record this Hangout for future review on your channel, there's a lot of important info that I will need to continually refer back to. Thanks, Greg and Team Cubase. Yes, these are all available to stream afterwards. Okay, question. Can you please help me find out how to rescan my disk in Groove Agent 5 standalone or SE versions? I can't find the option to rescan when I'm in the file browser section. So let's say if I just come over here. And a lot of this could be set up with, when we looked at the Steinberg library manager. So if you're not seeing this content, you could go there, but you could also just go to Media Bay and you should see kind of VST Sound. And here you'll see, all of the different, like acoustic agent. So here, just kind of go to VST Sound, and with these, just right-click and click on Rescan Disk, and then it should be fine. All right, we're running out of time here soon. We'll see if we get through a couple more questions. I want to thank everyone for great questions. I hope everyone's learned some tips and tricks. So I see a question. Any plans to be able to extract chords from an audio file similar to what could be done in Studio One? We're getting the ARA support coming soon, so we may be able to do it there. But I think even the extraction of chords is still pretty limited for a lot of different voicing. So usually when we implement something, we try not to make it where it's, kind of crippled just to have the feature. So, but, I understand the desire for wanting that, but there's a lot of stuff that doesn't seem to work on. All right, so just going through a couple more questions. Is there an easy way to open and close a single folder track with the key command? So yeah, let me see if I can remember what the key command is. Let's say I have this. Let's take a quick look under project. So you could just go under project, under folding, fold tracks, folding, toggle, selected track. So you could just set it directly there. So you could set up your own key commands. So I'm seeing a question, the panning of the aux sends isn't available for all the tracks. So I think there should be. So let's take a quick look. Let's say if I come here and I have a reverb on this particular track. So it looks like it's a mono track. Let's get to a stereo track, see if that's different. So it kind of looks the same here, but maybe if you could let me know which particular, if there's a particular type of track that you're running into. Seeing a comment that some of these features aren't in Cubase Artist 9.5. You could always upgrade. So I think it's a great investment going from Artist to the full version of Cubase. So Okay, so I think we're just about ready to wrap up. Let's see if there's any last minute quick questions I could sneak in. Okay, a quick question on what the last color update was. So this allows you to now have a color tool that was kind of missing from previous ones. So if we, want to come over here, you can now also just from the window here change the colors by using the scroll wheel directly from here. So if you hold down the Alt key, you could change the colors and you get kind of your color tool back. So those are some of the new changes in the 10.0.15 update. All right, with that, I want to thank everyone for the wonderful questions. We've gone about 3 hours. I have to sneak home and grab my son from school. But I want to thank everyone for wonderful, just a great hangout. I thought there's a lot of great questions. And again, this will be available to watch online. If you found the video helpful, please feel free to like the video and to subscribe to the channel. And with that, we'll go ahead and sign off. And again, thank you so much and look forward to seeing you on future Hangouts. And we'll see you soon. Thank you very much. Goodbye.